All right, let's get going. Hi, how you doing? Welcome back. So I created a couple of slots for you to schedule office hours for next week. If you go there, you should be able to choose one of these slots. I believe there's some people here already. Okay. Schedule for on Tuesday or next Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So please, make sure if you want to meet me, please choose one of these slots. I'll be doing this every week, right? So you can choose these slots up ahead of time. Also, this is a nice tool. You should visit it. It's Doodle.com. Yes.
Is this only if you want to meet with you? Is it mandatory?
No, it's not mandatory. It's not mandatory. But oftentimes happens that everybody comes up with the same with many people just for that. For this one, you will know if there's already you're going to be there and have the schedule. Everybody can see it. All right. Also, Doodle.com is a very simple tool, and I'd love for someone to build something similar. That would be a legitimate project this semester, and it could be embedded in our portal application that people could log in, right? And then they could see schedules. They can view their schedule. They can see what the office hours are for next week, and just schedule from within the portal. Be a nice addition to our current portal, right? Ideally, you would log in, and in your profile page, right, one tab would allow you to do something like this, right? It would allow you to choose, right? There would be yes. In Piazza, I sent an invitation on Piazza. Right here, there's a link there. Right? If you go there, it goes to something that looks like this, but it gives you actually checkboxes where you can enter your name and enter the checkbox. If our meeting takes more than 15 minutes, right, it could spill over, half an hour or more. That's fine. I'll just see everybody that day. I'll see that it's scheduled for that particular day. Okay, so you need half an hour. Don't take 2 slots. All right. Okay, just take one of the slots. We'll take how long it takes. All right. So if anybody's interested in building something like this, right, and embedding it and linking it to our project, that'd be great. Right. There could be a free version, free for everybody out there, but then also embedded integrated inside of our project. That'd be great. Many people from later on are going to take the course will be using your tool, right? So that'd be cool. You could put your name there, right? All right. I also came up with a poll. Quick poll. Looks like a lot of you think that the pace is a little too slow, so we could pick it up a little bit, maybe. The graduate sections seem that looks like I'm right on pace, although we're covering exactly the same material. So they seem to think it's perfectly fine. I thought that was funny.
They did the other classes are harder.
Yeah.
They don't want to.
Usually, I think you have a higher workload than they do. They take maybe 2 or 3 courses, right, a semester. Whereas I think some of you are taking 5 or 6 courses, right? So anyway, that was interesting. Although from in the graduate course, I have people from like electrical engineering, and I have from other non-CS. What about here? Anybody here not from CS? Okay, there's a few of you. All right. So, do you feel it's too slow? It's just fine. All right. So maybe there's more CS students here. Anyway, so let's see if we could pick it up a little bit. Let's look at our agenda. According to our agenda, we should be finishing up a grid system, Bootstrap. So we should be done with Bootstrap today. And we'll be starting with JavaScript, jQuery, JSON, Ajax next week. And we'll be working on JavaScript for the next 3 weeks. So the first one will be, how to, in general, what JavaScript is and what it could be used for to dynamically manipulate the DOM, Ajax to be able to. And then we'll spend a couple of weeks talking about AngularJS as one of the more popular JavaScript MVC frameworks out there. And we'll spend a couple of weeks doing that. And as we progress on the server side development, then I think the pace will pick up. All right. All right. So let's. We went over the project proposal, right? Did we go over that? Does anybody have any questions about the project proposal? Is it clear, right? That's 2 users, 2 domain objects, many-to-many, all those relationships, class diagrams, yes, the architectural diagram, the use cases, the actors. Everybody is clear with that, right? If you haven't done databases and you have questions about the UML diagram, we can spend some time together. We can go over that. Those that have done 3200 or other databases, I think you should find that fairly simple to do that. And I believe we had started going through all these examples, the HTML and CSS examples. I forget, did we complete all of them? Did we get all the way down to grid? Remember if we got down to grid? Maybe not, huh? Specificity, I think we at least specificity we got to, I think, right? So let's finish up all these examples so that we can move on. So visibility, I think we covered visibility, did we? Well, the 2 ways that you can control visibility. So here we have the right sign tool is the console, the inspector that allows us to look at our page, right, that we went over last class, right? That it's a great tool that you should become familiar with, right? That we're going to use it quite a bit throughout the semester to be able to debug and look at how the browser is behaving. So this experiment just illustrates the fact of being able to control whether certain elements are visible or not on the page, right? And there's 2 basic ways that we can use to control this. One is the attribute of visibility, right? Whether it's visible or not. And the other one is display, whether it's display none or block or whatnot, right? Those are the 2 major ways that we can control whether they're visible or not. But they work fundamentally different on how they control whether something is visible. And if we open up and we look at the source code, we can look at the original HTML. We can see that there's styling for 3 IDs, right? Yellow box, blue box, and red box, which are these respectively. And down below we have three divs. You see that? We have the yellow one here, the blue, and the red. When this gets parsed, we have this object model, right? This DOM, this document object model that we can navigate, right? And look at each individual element as they are parsed and interpreted and then rendered on the browser. And we can look at the styling below for each one of them. So if you look at yellow, all of these, you notice that the styling below, they're basically just setting the background color to either blue, right, yellow, or red. You see that? But the blue one has these strike-throughs to two attributes, right? Visibility and display. And those are the ones I want to focus on just real quickly. So these 2 attributes, visibility, controls whether the element is visible, and display whether also if it's going to display at all. But visibility, just notice that if I add visibility hidden, or if I check and add it, notice that it disappears, it's not rendered, but it's still used in the calculation of the position of its neighbors. Right? Notice that the neighbors are still in the same place; they haven't moved. Right? So it's as if it's invisible, right? But it's still there, right? As opposed to if I add a display none, you'll notice that the blue box disappears, right? Meaning it's as if it was never there. It was never added to the DOM. What would the page look like if it was never added to the DOM, right? And when we get to JavaScript, we'll be able to dynamically control these attributes, right? Programmatically, set them to display none, or display block, or display inline, or visibility hidden, or visible, right? And programmatically, we'll be able to detect and control their visibility, and say, as you toggle a button or a checkbox or something, we will programmatically be able to show things and disappear and make them disappear. It'll be a nice effect that allows you to maybe handle lots and lots of content on a page, right? Where you can toggle through certain pieces of content, right? And that's how we're going to achieve that kind of feature, right? Okay, so that's visibility. Any question? That's easy, right? Let's look at float. So up to this point, the content that we have been rendering has been displayed, by top to bottom, right? Things usually if it's a block element, right? Usually what they do is they take up the entire width of the screen, right? And then the content inside just wraps as behaving like inline elements, right? As opposed to inline elements, which just basically just flow from left to right, and there's no more, it just wraps. The two basic mechanisms that we can use for laying out pages. But we'd like to be able to do something a little more sophisticated, where we want to be able to control things that are blocks, but have some aspects of inline elements, right? So for instance, we'd like to do this kind of layout where we have content that is displayed not in vertically, right? But we like to be able to horizontally have several columns right next to each other like this, right? So notice that these three boxes look very, very much like the original three boxes that we had in the previous example. See that? We have yellow, blue, and red. Okay? But in the previous example, they were rendering vertically, right? Taking up the entire width of the screen. See that? Whereas over here, the same exact three blocks, the same exact three divs are now rendered side by side. And this opens up the possibility to lay out pages in a much more interesting way, right? Not just from top to bottom, but in columns, perhaps the way you would expect it, if you're looking at a magazine, right, or an articles or newspaper, right, where they're typically laid out in this fashion. Originally, at the beginning, when HTML just came out, we would use tables to do this, right? We would misuse table to achieve this effect, right? What we would do is that we would create a row, right, and then we would put elements in the columns of those tables, right? And that definitely has fallen out of favor. Tables were meant to display tabular data. They were never meant to lay out pages. So, but this became very popular early on, and since then, we've stopped misusing some of the elements, original elements, right? For instance, we no longer use the center element to center any content. We don't use the bold elements to bold anything, or the I to italize, or U to underline, right? All these look and feel aspects of the page have been moved to the appropriate scope. That is, it's a style sheets, right? CSS. Any look and feel, right, should be achieved through a style sheet as opposed to these HTML elements. So anyway, so how do we do this using CSS if we're not using tables, right? Added to these divs, we've added these col classes. You see that? So two things here. Notice that we are applying two classes to each element. See that? So to an element, you can apply as many classes as you want. Okay, and each class will have its rules and its attributes that apply to that particular element. Yes, right. So any of the classes that match that particular rule, right, will be applied to that particular element. Right. So you can apply more than one class to the same element. Right. So that's the first thing that we're pointing out. The second thing that we're pointing out is that If we look at well, you pretty much could guess what yellow, blue, and red classes do, right? The only thing that they do is just, you know, if it has the red class, it's red. If it's blue, and yellow, yellow, right? That's easy. But what COL is doing, or column, what it's doing, it's adding the following attributes. It's adding a default width, 200 pixels, right? And it's adding the attribute float left. See that? Okay. What float does, what the float attribute does, to the rendering engine is that I don't want to use the default rendering behavior, right? The rendering behavior is that I'm a block, right, and then I take up the entire width of the page, right? When we use the float element, right, the width is no longer going to be determined by the width of the page. It's going to be determined by the content of what's inside of the div. Right. So now the div, the width of the div, is either can be determined by the content, or it can be determined by you specifically telling it what the width you want. In this case, we are specifically saying that we want the width to be 2. Okay. Additionally, the float attribute, what it does is that, like the name suggests, right? It moves the element to the leftmost that it could do, and then anything around it, anything that is around that float element, right, or floating element, kind of like wraps around it, right? Wraps around that element to fill in the gaps left by that element, right? So what this is doing is that it's applying this floating behavior to all these elements, all the div elements, and that's how they're being stuck, right? Floating to the next element that's to its leftmost, right? Notice what happens here is that additionally, look what happens when the width of the page becomes too small. See that? It wraps, right? So it's kind of a combination of both behaviors, right? Of it's behaving inline because it's being rendered from left to right. Yes, right. Also, it's behaving like inline elements because if it doesn't fit, it wraps. You see that? But instead of this behavior being, individual pieces of text or individual pieces of words or phrases, right? It's entire, right, blocks, right, of content that we can do this with, right? So we can give the same behavior that we have smaller inline elements to larger block, typically block elements, right? So we still even though we have columns and this allows us to fill the content horizontally, right, from left to right, okay, in large chunks, right? It still allows us for it to be and adapt to smaller screens, right, by just stacking elements, right, vertically as opposed to horizontally, right? So for wider screens, we can choose a content, a layout that is appropriate for large screens, like columns. I have a big screen, I can read several columns. But for smaller screens, like phones, right, it can adapt and just relay out itself, right, into this stacked layout. Right? So it's nice and responsive, right? Okay. Any questions? All right. So let's take that a little further. Let's go on to the next example. And in this example, we take the float attribute a little further and see how far can we take this, right? So it looks like we can now break up the page, right, in columns, right? And can we also break it up into various rows, right? That'd be cool, right? Because even now that we don't have tables, basically we can't use tables for layout. We still want to have the same that tables gave us. Right? Tables are very they become popular because it was so easy, right, to break up the page into rows and columns, right, and think about them in some kind of like grid, right? You can span the content across many columns, right? So it was a very easy way of thinking about the page. Well, here it is. we have look at this. We have achieved that look and feel of being able to break up the content in various rows and columns. Looks like this is one single row over here with various columns. See that? Looks like this down here is also several columns right next to each other, but the whole thing looks like it's a row. See that? Row with 4 columns, it looks like. Down below, it looks like it's one row with 2 columns. You see that? Right? So we certainly want to be able to lay out pages like this, and we're going to use the floating mechanisms to achieve this effect. So if we look at the source code here, we'll notice that if we look at the source code that was downloaded, we can see the original HTML. Okay, and down below we see that first of all we have a div outside that says container. See that? Right, that container. I deliberately chose the name container because later on when we get to Bootstrap, it's going to be there's a class in Bootstrap called container that does exactly what I've done here. What it's doing, notice that it's kind of like the parent of everything else, right? Everything is put inside of this container, and what it's doing, it's applying some styling, right? That is giving it a default width of 600. That means that you're starting from this left-hand side, leftmost content here, all the way down to the rightmost, right? That's 600 pixels, right? And then it's applying a margin auto, and we saw that, you know, in a couple of experiments back. The combination of setting the width and auto, what it does is just basically what? It centers the page, right? It centers right in the middle, and everything around is just margins, right? Now inside of that, you'll notice that we have a couple of divs. We have this div over here with the class row, and we have another one down here, again another class row, and another one down here with class row. So it looks like we have 3 rows, right? If we go to the elements, we'll be able to see it as objects. Notice here's container, right? And we have the 3 rows, 1, 2, and 3. There's 3 rows right there, and then each row has several columns, COL-2, right? And what these classes seem to be doing is doing what? It's kind of like basically using the same technique we saw in the previous example, just floating everything left. See that? Right, it's floating it left. Right there, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns. The -2 that follows each one of these columns, right? But the basic meaning of that, or the way we're going to interpret that, is that this is a column that has one column that is spanning 2 columns, right? It's one column that's made up of really 2 columns, right? It's spanning 2 columns, right? If we do the math, if we have 6 columns there, each one spanning 2 columns, there's really how many in total? There's 12 columns in total, right? So it looks like we've decided that, you know, we've decided that we could break up an entire page into 12 distinct pieces, right, or 12 distinct columns, and it's fairly thin, right? Notice that this one, it's already fairly thin, right? It's only what, 100 pixels across. Okay, that means that each individual column might be just 50 pixels across, right? Maybe too small to fit any useful content in there, right? So this col-2 says, I'm going to take 2 of these 50 pixel columns, and I'm going to make up just 1 column, right? So the way we achieve that is, and look at the style down here, right? Notice that column-2 is saying that it's floating left, like we did earlier. Decided that the width is going to be 100. See that? 100. And how many columns are there? There's 6 of them. And 6 times 100, that's 600. You see that? It fills up the entire row of, that is, I know it's 600 pixels wide. 6 columns, 100 each, I have the 600 pixels. Make sense? Yes? Or I could have done 12 50 pixel columns, right? And that would have made, again, 50 times 12 will give me the 600 pixels wide. Make sense? right? So this is a very common technique in grid systems. Is we all smaller pieces, and how we're going to build the content by spanning across all these columns, right? So that's column 2. The second row. So in the second row over here, we decided to do 4 columns, each one spanning 3 columns, right? 3 times 4, again, the 12. You get 12 columns in total, right? And that's how you fill up the entire content. So notice that it's basically giving us the same functionality, that table was giving us, right? Tables were made up of rows and columns, right? It's giving us the same functionality, but we are achieving the same behavior, but using CSS. And down here we have the last row with just 2 columns, each one spanning 6 columns each. See that? Right? And that's exactly what Bootstrap does. Bootstrap, obviously, this is a toy example, right? That we're building ourselves, right? But Bootstrap is takes this idea, right, and just runs with it and makes a very, very sophisticated grid system, right, based on the same idea. But theirs is even more powerful. Theirs, for instance, as it doesn't fit. See that it doesn't fit. Theirs starts to wrap around. If it doesn't fit, right, it just wraps around and it stacks the content so that if the content is too small, right, it stacks them vertically so that it's visible on a phone. Right? So it adds the capability of the support of mobile phones. Okay, makes sense? Makes sense what a grid system is? Well, you can see yourself building one, right? Now that you know how grid systems work, we can jump on Bootstrap and see how Bootstrap creates its own grid system, right? So here's Bootstrap, and as I mentioned earlier, so Bootstrap is takes a lot of these responsive and grid systems and very common techniques that have moved through several years of using CSS and solving responsive design issues, and they bring it together into a single reusable modular CSS grid system. It's accessible at Get Bootstrap if you haven't been there already. You have some here's some of the more common CSS classes and styles that you should go over. So become somewhat familiar with this documentation, right? You should go over and see if CSS already has a solution for one of your problems, right? If you think of something, oh, I would like to do this, right? If you come up with ideas, first look to see if this has already been solved at Bootstrap, right? Or at jQuery, right? Or any one of these libraries that we're going to use throughout the semester, right? First look if that's solved there. Feel free to copy these templates, right? These snippets of code in your own code, right? It's a very common thing to do in the industry, right? If it's invented, if somebody solved it already, you can participate in that community. All right, so let's look at this. So here's a Bootstrap, and we're looking at how Bootstrap created its own. Yes. No, I expect you to be copying.
Like in industry.
No, it's open source. Yeah. So here's Bootstrap's implementation of the grid system. Okay, you'll notice that here's examples of more or less what we were trying to do. Right? Here's one huge row that includes a column that spans across the 12 columns. So it breaks up the page into these 12 virtual columns, right? And then you can combine. Maybe you want to have a column on the left-hand side that spans 6 columns, And you can combine that with 2 columns on the right-hand side that span 3 columns, right? You can combine maybe this 6 over here with 2 of these 3, to fill in the content. See that? Or you might have smaller ones, right? You might have 2 columns here that span just 2 columns on the left-hand side over here, right? Notice that theirs is so much prettier. Notice that they add some margins between their columns, right? Notice that as the content becomes smaller and smaller, notice that everything transitions nicely, right, into they all become stacked. See that? Doesn't fit? I'll change to a stacked version of this, and then I'll make it even smaller. Notice that there's some transitions in between here that make it responsive so that it can still be visible using just a phone. Okay, so this is a transition that happens. Now, notice that if we look at the source code for this, okay, the way this is a Bootstrap.css, right? Notice at the outside we have a div that says container. See that? That container is doing basically what we were doing, right? It was saying, add the margins, center it, give it a width, and then everything in there is centered within that container. Then we have this initial paragraph, and then we have several rows. We have a row here, right? This first row, and then we have another row down here, and we have another row down here. We have several rows, and then inside of each one of the rows we have columns. Here's my first column, right? This column seems to take up the entire row, right? And that's evidenced by the fact that we're using a class called col column, right? And the -12, right? We already know what that means, right? It means that this column is spanning all 12 virtual columns. Yes? Right, so it's taking up the entire width of that row. Okay? There is this additional nomenclature here, LG. See that? Okay? And we've seen that we're looking at that they all are using the same nomenclature. Let's see. The second row, same thing, right? We have one column here, and we have a second column, right? And each one of the columns spans 6 of the virtual columns. See that? Right, 6 on the left-hand side and 6 on the right-hand side. They make up to the 12 virtual columns. Yes, make up these 2 over here. Oops. Yeah, these 2 over here, right? These 2. Okay, but they too have this LG nomenclature. See that? What that means is that Bootstrap is targeting, several screen sizes. Okay, and it uses this nomenclature to refer to each type of size of screen. Like large screen (LG), medium-sized screens (MD), small-sized screens (SM), and extra small size (XS). Okay, and what this nomenclature says is that you can control when you want columns and when you don't want columns. What we're saying here is that we want columns for large screens. Okay? If the screen is smaller than a large screen, I don't want columns. That's what basically it says. Right? And that's how it's behaving. Right? That's how it's behaving, right? If I go here, we'll notice that for large screens, right, we have the columns, but as it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, right, the columns disappear. I don't have columns anymore. It just becomes stacked. Make sense? Right? This is evidence in the next example. If I go to grid medium and I open that up, notice that the content is exactly the same as before. Yes? Exactly the same. Right? Same columns. But as I make it smaller, look what happens. When I reach the threshold, look what happens. I still have the columns. See that? They didn't stack, right? Because I used the nomenclature MD. Right? If you look at the source code for this, we'll notice that it's exactly the same content as the previous example, but wherever we had L previous example, here we have MD. Meaning we want the same layout as the previous example. We want the same layout for medium-sized screens and higher. Right? What we were saying, we want these columns for medium-sized screens and large-sized screens. We want columns. Anything that is smaller than medium-sized screens, I want them to stack. Right? So let's look at that again. So if we see here, okay, so that's large screen. That's medium screen. Notice what it does. Right? It size of the outer container, right? Makes it smaller so that it responds to smaller, maybe a tablet perhaps, or a large tablet. It also resizes the width of each one of the columns. See that? Right? So notice that these columns, the columns inside, are growing vertically, right, to fit the content, right? But when I go under medium-sized screen, when I get to small screens, there it is, they all stack up. You see that? So again, supporting all types of size of screens. Yes?
Why are 3 and 4 flip-flop?
I'm sorry?
Why are 3 and 4 flip-flop?
3 and 4.
Like if you expand it out, there's the 4 is in 3 columns, 4 columns.
So we have 12, 6, 6, 4, 4. And it becomes 6, 6, and then 4, 4, 4. Yeah. Okay. All right. And then obviously it just keeps going and smaller and smaller and smaller until everything just becomes just wrapping, right? And finally, and there's a couple more. There's a couple more. Right, there's a grid medium and grid small, which is exactly the same content as before, same content, but what you're saying here is instead of using large, instead of using medium, now we use small, SM, that nomenclature. Small screens and higher, I want columns. Okay, I want columns. So I can go down, and now I am in medium-sized screens, and now I am in small-sized screens, and I still have the columns. You see that? Now, whether it's appropriate or not that you want columns, that's up to you. You're the ones who's deciding whether you want LG, SM, ND. You're deciding that, right? Because you know your content. You decide whether it's appropriate that in a tablet it is okay to use columns or not. Okay, right? And finally, right? Notice that I keep going down, and then on a phone it would just stack. They all stack, and then I could use it on a phone. And finally, there's the last one where I would have the same exact content, but for XS, right? Extra small. This says that I want columns regardless what the size of the screen is. From extra small screen all the way up to large screens, right? Meaning I want to force columns even on my phone, right? If I have a bigger screen, I still have columns. If I have bigger, I have columns, right? Anywhere up and up and up, right? So in this one, right? If I make it smaller, notice that it becomes. Yes, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, guys. We're going to be having a fire drill in here. You guys don't have to leave. I just didn't want you.
Oh, okay.
Just so you know.
We could stay here.
Stay right there. Yep.
All right. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right. So this is for large screens, medium screens, small screen (SM), and finally all the way down to really, really tiny screens, right? The phones. Even on a phone, I have, my side-by-side columns, right? Even you have these really tiny, really skinny columns down below. Whether this is appropriate or not, right? It's up to you. You decide whether this is really what you want. Make sense? All right? But if you insist on having columns on a phone and higher, right? This is how you would achieve it. This is how you can target various types of screens. Now, what's happening here? Look what's happening here, right? There's a threshold. Right? And it's like the styles are being applied, like based on some kind of rule, and that rule is somewhat dependent on the width of the screen, right? So that seems very much like logic, right? Is there JavaScript here that is deciding, how the sizes, dynamically change? No JavaScript. Okay, no JavaScript. Instead, what it uses are media, what are called media rules. Media rules, right? Media rules have been around in HTML for quite a while, right? And what they allow you to do is to have pages target different types of media. Right? So, for instance, if you want to print a page, right, you might decide that it makes no sense to have all these banners and ads and colors and all this marketing, right? That it just makes no sense to provide all that when you print. Print is one type of media, right? Or you might decide that a projector, right, you would like for the fonts to be bigger, right? To have less eye candy, right? Because you just want to present the data, right? And you might decide that yet another media. Yes? So the media rules allow you to target different types of media. Okay? These same media rules allow you to target different sizes of screens. You can say, I'm targeting the screen, but I'm targeting different versions of the screen, different sizes of the screen. Right? And then you can determine what do you want to happen when the what do you want to happen for different sizes of that screen. You could have a CSS, right, set of rules for the large screen, right, between 1024 and 1200, and then you might have another CSS, right, for something between 800 and 900, right, or 1024, and you might have yet another set of rules, right, for anything below 800 and maybe 500. And then yet another set of rules for anything lower than 400, right? And that's exactly what Bootstrap does. Bootstrap creates these media rules, right? So that they are applied strategically at different thresholds. So anything above, I forget what it is, 9 something. It applies one set of style sheets, right? When it gets below a certain threshold, between a set of thresholds, it applies yet another style sheet, right? And that's how it changes the width. See that? See how it changes the width? It changes the width of the outside container, right? From circa 900 down to maybe 700, and then it does it again, right? When I reach another threshold, it changes it down to maybe 500, right? And then again to something even smaller, and then it just becomes just proportional to the width of the window, right? So yeah, so media rules allows us to do that. Okay, so forms. I think we covered forms a little bit already. Okay, so here's just a list of a sample of the various form elements that are available, right? That you can control with the attribute type. Okay? Using the input field, with the input field, you have various types that you can select. Right? There's the default is just plain text, right? Just a single line of text. Right? But you have many others. You have dates, you have email. Right? You've already, I think you're using that already in your assignment, right? But you have many others. You have color, a color picker, so you can choose a color. You have a color picker. You have the default date picker, okay? And this is not standard across all browsers. Each browser has its own date picker, Right? And for now, for the current assignment, let's just use the default date picker, right? That the browser gives you. When we get to JavaScript, we'll use plugins, right? We'll use a JavaScript a jQuery plugin, right, to provide our own date picker that is so much more powerful, and it can be standardized across all browsers, regardless of what the browser you're using. Okay, but for now, let's use the default date picker. You have a choose. You can choose a file if you want to upload. Right. This only allows you to choose the file. Okay. You know, browse your file system to retrieve a file. This file picker. It has a button and then it displays the name of the file. Okay, because it's an input field that is able to look at your file system, right? It's a very somewhat protected input field, right? Because for instance, there's a lot of things you can't do programmatically. Right? You can't programmatically tell the file picker, right, to go and browse through your file system. Right? We definitely don't want to give that any programmatic control. Imagine you download some JavaScript, and that JavaScript uses somehow the file picker to peruse through your file system, right? Definitely has some security around it that forces a human to actually click, right, and then go and peruse these files. There's very little programmatic control around this file picker for security purposes, right? We have numbers that you can use spinners, and you can put these spinners. You can put max, mins, right, minimum and maximum values. You can put default values for these. You have checkboxes. Okay. You have radio buttons. Now, radio buttons are a little bit different in that the way they're implemented is notice that the behavior typically is for things that are mutually exclusive. When you're selecting things that are mutually exclusive, right? And to achieve that, right, we can look at the source code in a minute. But notice how they are different, fundamentally different than checkboxes. Checkboxes are meant for selecting, one, 0 or more, right? Any number of these. To achieve the fact that these are independent of each other or mutually exclusive, let's look at the source code. Actually, not the source code. Let's look at let's inspect it. Okay, so these checkboxes, these radio, the way we render them so that they look like radio buttons, we use a type radio. See that? Type radio makes them into radio buttons. But to make them mutually exclusive, what you do is that you give them a name attribute. See that? Right? And if they share the same name, right, they all have the same name, then the browser understands that these are all mutually exclusive, right? There's only one choice that you can make. Right? They all have the same name, but there's only one choice, and that's how you can make it. If they do not share the same name, they behave just like checkboxes. Right? You can choose more than one, but then you would not use the radio buttons, right? Because radio buttons are for mutually exclusive choices. Okay. We have here range. That's a new type, right? Range allows you to have these sliders, right? And you can give it a range, a minimum of 10 and a maximum of 20. Right? That you can change. You can start at 0 and then jump by 2s, right? So 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, all the even numbers, right? So you can do that. Labels, I believe we had mentioned labels, right? That if you can make them so that if you click on the label, it also it takes focus on that particular element that or input field that is associated with it. We have emails, right? So this one has, let's see, we can inspect, and we said, yeah, type email. mistyped it, because I mistyped it and I tried to submit, right, it's complaining, right? Also notice that these forms, I think we covered this before, right, didn't we? These are snippets of codes that I copied straight from Bootstrap. Did we cover that? We did that, right? For the assignment, we did that early on. I think like maybe last week we did that. What else? These are inline forms. We're using Bootstrap's inline forms so that they render from left to right as opposed to from top to bottom, right? From in vertical format. And we have horizontal forms which render in two columns. You have the labels on one column and you have the input fields on the other column. You see that? And they are responsive, right? As you make the screen smaller, notice that they change. You know, they flip. Right, notice that on large screens, this is appropriate, right, to have the fields on one side and have the input fields on the right-hand side. But adapts. Notice that they become smaller and smaller, and then when they don't fit, notice that they switch, right? They switch into a vertical rendering. See that? Okay. So let's spend a little time on how is that accomplished. So for horizontal forms, so these forms are implemented as follows. If you go to Bootstrap and you go to CSS, right, down on the right-hand side, you can see several very common stylings for all sorts of things, right? So for instance, you can go and look at forms, right? And you have some of the basic HTML that you can grab from here, right? You can grab some of these forms, right, and copy in your code, right, to achieve the same kinds of layout. So this is basically, you know, the basic forms: label, input field, label, input field, label, input field, right? This is very common, where the label is above the input field. Okay, that's the default layout. But there are other layouts, right? In particular, you have what it's called the horizontal layout, where fields are on the left-hand side. Labels on the left-hand side and the fields are on the right-hand side. And these are examples of snippets of code that this field. Okay, and these behave like I showed you earlier, right? They are responsive. They flip, right, from horizontal to vertical when the screen is too small. So here we can look at this the code real quick. The outside form takes the class form horizontal, and then this field group over here that makes up the label and the field, that's considered to be a group, right, or form group, and of which we have three of them. There's one here, right, which is this email form group, right? This one refers to this password field down here. See that, right? And to achieve that layout, we use the class form group, right, to group together the label and the field over here, and then we provide the input field in its own input input element. Okay, and it behaves responsively, right? So we did the same thing, right? If we hover over this, right, and we go down here, and we have the horizontal, this one down here. See that? If I hover over that, we can look at the source code and we can see each individual form group. See that? If each one's label, right? This one is for the email. This is for the password. Right? If I make this a little bigger, it changes to horizontal.
Attention, please. The signal tone you have just heard indicates
Got a heart attack.
of an emergency in this building. If your floor evacuation signal sounds after this message, walk to the nearest stairway and leave the floor. While the report is being verified, occupants on other floors should await further instructions. Attention, please. The signal tone you have just heard indicates a report of an emergency in this building. If your floor evacuation signal sounds after this message, after this message, walk to nearest stairway and leave 16 verified. Occupants on other floors should await further instructions.
Okay. Oh my goodness, I got a heart attack. So yeah, so this is just examples on how to, several alternatives on how to lay out forms, right? No. Are you serious? All right, I'm gonna try and talk over that.
It's not all distracting.
It's not, yeah.
It's not loud or anything.
Well, as I was saying, oh man. Okay. These are several layouts. These are inline forms. These are horizontal forms. Just become familiar with Bootstrap, right? If you want to lay out something out. Tables, I think we went over tables a little bit. But I think that you can grab some of this and use them in your own assignments, right? Notice that we have on the right-hand side, right? We have data in the columns. We have the stripes. You see the colors are alternating, right? So this is something that you can certainly grab some of this, right, and copy it, and you can definitely reuse it in your own assignment, right? So for the user admin page, you could certainly grab this. Although notice that there's a flaw here. You see those buttons on the right-hand side? These buttons, right? They're wrapping, right? And that's unacceptable. We can fix that. We can say inspect. And we can pull that out. Maybe move it to the right-hand side, and we can look at the TD here, right? And we can change that. We can apply a styling such as white space. And notice that it provides some values for these attributes where I can make it so it doesn't wrap. See that? See that? We can apply those stylings. So you can change the behavior of things that wrap. Okay, if you see something that's not wrapping, that is wrapping, and you don't mean it for it to wrap, right? Go back and see if you can apply some of these attributes, right, and fix it. Again, I don't want to see things that are wrapping, right, that are not meant to wrap. Okay? Certainly, those buttons were not meant to wrap, right? And you can certainly fix that. We did fix it for this table. We should be able to go back and change it into source code so that it's permanent. Let's look at the source code for this table. Notice that for the first row, here's the table, right? Here's the head of the table. Notice that for the head of the table, we have two rows. Look at that. The first row, we're using the first row for headings. See that? We're using the second row as an inline form. See that? Right? That allows you to interact with the data. Maybe it allows you to maybe add new records, right? Or allows you to maybe edit existing records, right? Maybe we could also use this like for searching. Would it be cool? right? We could add an additional button here as like a search button, so that maybe I could filter. You know, I can type first name, right? I can click on that search button, and then down below it shows me those elements, right, that meet that. That first row can be, you know, very powerful, although maybe too powerful, right? Maybe these would be features that are appropriate for a system admin, right? That would expect all these buttons, you know, overloaded, you know, capabilities, right? All these use cases, all in one single page, right? They love that. But for an end user, it might not be appropriate. Right? I think it would be an overload of use cases in one single page. So again, you have to think about, you know, what user interface is appropriate for your particular audience. Okay. Oh man, I'm yelling. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that these buttons over here, they look like buttons, don't they? They look like buttons, but and they're actually rendered as hyperlinks. See that? They're rendered as hyperlinks. I'm sorry, they're implemented as hyperlinks. And the reason they look like buttons is that because we're using the class BTN. You see that? Right? They behave. They look like buttons, but they're not actually buttons. They're hyperlinks. Okay. Now we're not going to be using hyperlinks or buttons the way they normally behave, right? Normally hyperlinks behave what? What do? They're meant for, you click a hyperlink and it navigates away and it loads another page. Yes? We're not going to be doing that. Well, you are doing that in your current assignment, right? But in the next assignment, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to jump into single-page applications. And in single-page applications, we never leave a page, right? We're always staying the same page. We never navigate. Right? We never reload the page. Yes? We dynamically load content and show it at strategic points. Yes? Right? So we're not going to be using hyperlinks the way that we typically use hyperlinks. And we're not going to be using buttons the way we normally use buttons, right? And buttons, the legacy way of using buttons is that they are inside of a form. You click a form, and the form gets submitted, right? It's submitted to the server. We're not going to be doing it that way, right? So we're going to hijack. We're going to hijack of hyperlinks and buttons, right? We're going to hijack starting next week with JavaScript. And Angular, but for rendering hyperlinks are a little more convenient than buttons. Okay, so I would suggest that even if you want to render a button, that you would use a hyperlink instead, okay, and not a button. All right, like we did over here. You have a hyperlink, and it's rendered like a button. Notice that internally we have some art, some glyphicon, some image. For that, we're using Bootstrap's glyphicon library, right? You can visit the library in Bootstrap. Where is it? What did I do with it? Oh, thank you. You can visit the glyphicon like Bootstrap, and there's a whole set of free glyphicons that they're implemented as scalar vector graphics, right? So these are actually drawn, right, and they can easily scale for any size of the screen, right, without losing any details, right? So they're perfect for for rendering in all sorts of screen sizes, right? They can easily scale, right, regardless of the size of the screen. Okay, so you have a whole bunch of free glyphicons that you can use, right? They're very, very common images. Does anybody remember what a floppy disk was? It's still used as a universal symbol for saving, even though there's a whole generation of people that haven't used a floppy disk, you know, but still used as a. Anyway, so yeah, so you have all these glyphicons that you can use, and the library grows every day. So anyway, so here we use that to render this, right? Here we use the same glyphicons, but we didn't render it as a button. Notice that these are also hyperlinks. If you look at the implementation, their implementation, they too are just plain old glyphicons, right? So let's look at them. Notice that they are implemented as hyperlinks. There they are, right? And inside we have that should be a span, not a scan, with a glyphicon inside. You see that, right? It's a hyperlink, but notice that we did not use the class button to render it as a button. It's just a hyperlink, right? This is just takes up less space, right? And achieves the same effect. Drop downs. To achieve drop downs, right? We use the select elements, and the select element allows you to create these drop downs with the various options inside of the select statement, right? So you have the select. The form control is a class, a Bootstrap class that expands the form control to take up, as much width as you give it, right? That's why it's when you expand this, right? You have notice that all these form elements, right? They expand, right, to take up the entire width, which looks really nice. Notice that the options, notice that it has two things inside. One is a text, the actual text that the user sees, right? Notice when I drop down here, we have user, admin, student, and faculty, and this is the text. See the text? That's a text. That should be a human-friendly piece of text, right? That's what the user sees. This is what they read. But behind the scenes, the option values, these are the actual value if you select that particular element. If you choose user, admin, student, faculty, right? The value of the select is whatever you put in here as a value, right? And oftentimes these values are computer friendly, right? Or program friendly, right? Or database friendly. Yes? They're part of your object model. They're part of how you're representing it in RAM or how you're representing it in the database. Yes? Which not necessarily is the way it's represented for human, right? Humans might have, maybe a paragraph or a sentence, right, that explains what you're selecting. Yes? But in a database, you might be or some known value, right, that represents that human consumable piece of text. Okay. The only other thing that I want to point out is that these table over here is responsive, so that if you become smaller and it's too small, it becomes that allows you to just scroll left and right to view the content, whereas this one above is not responsive, right? And because it's not responsive, it forces me to scroll the entire page left and right. Right? You should avoid having to force me to scroll, right? We talked about that, right? Do not want to see unnecessary vertical scroll bars. And we can color the tables, right? Each one of the rows. Anyway. Let's keep going. Tables, tabs. Tabs, these are several versions of tabs that allow you to render just classical tabs and highlight. Other versions of tabs are pills, right? These are, notice that they, functionally they're the same as tabs, right? But it's just one more way of representing it, right? To represent of a large piece of content, you can represent it either horizontally, the way it's displayed up here, or you can represent it vertically, right, going up and down. You can stack them up. You can either have them rendered and justified to the left, like it's listed here, or on a smaller screen, like on a phone, right? It might make sense to have them, spill over and take up the entire width of the screen, like it's shown down here. Okay. Again, all that is shown in the examples here in the components or the CSS sections of Bootstrap, and I encourage you to go over those examples on your own. We have Jumbotron. So Jumbotron is one of those standard templates that Bootstrap gives you to get you started, right? So this would be, for instance, a nice place to start your homepage, right? Although I've seen that a lot of you have already chosen a style sheet. You've found a nice style sheet out there, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine, right? If you haven't right? So these sections down below you can use for so again this is a starting point. This is a starting template to use in your homepage or your landing page for your OpenShift URL or the landing page for your project. Yes. Okay. The dashboard, this is the one that we're using for the assignments. Yes, right, for the forms. Again, just to point out that you can get started from here, and we did that last week, I believe, right? So we're not going to go over that again. Blogs. Here's another template. Here's another template from Bootstrap that has a header for navigation, and then has just some example on how to style various articles, right? Various blog posts. Right? It has some dummy content in here, ideas on how to how to add the title to your blog, maybe some blurb underneath that describes that describes your blog, and then various posts, right? Here's a sample post, and there's several posts down below to see what it would look like, right? And then placeholders for the date that it was published, who published it, and then the content examples here, how to break up the content, how to add quotations, how to have several subsections in your blog. Right, and here's another blog post. So again, examples on how you would render blogs using. Everybody good? Yes. All right. Okay. Looks like we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Is it too fast now? All right, I hope to catch up and be able to start talking about other things. All right, JavaScript. All right, so in our syllabus, let's see. I'm sorry, in our agenda. All right, for the next couple of weeks, for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be using JavaScript, right? And JavaScript has been historically considered to be a client-side programming language, right? It's the language that is used on the browser so that we can programmatically control the browser, right? And now this is code that we write and we post into our servers, and then gets downloaded by whoever visits our page, right? And when they visit our page, the page then calls back asking for these other JavaScript files. Yes, it's downloaded to their browsers, and then it runs inside of the browser, right? And because it runs inside of the browser, to make it palatable, to make it acceptable for end users to use JavaScript, browsers are very careful at providing certain security around JavaScript, right? If you remember, Java early on when they came with its Java plugin, it was they had a lot of security issues, right? That you have this. So what do you mean I'm downloading somebody else's code and I'm allowing it to run on my machine? Says, what are you crazy? Says, I don't know what this code. Why would I download somebody else's code and just let it loose, right? And start and just wreak havoc on my local machine, right? You can start perusing through my. It's just how is this different than a virus, right? So Java, when it was Sun Microsystems, they did a lot of marketing and did a lot of PR, public relationship, to make it clear that they were limiting what the downloaded code could do. Right, so they weren't going to give it access to your local file system. They weren't going to give it access to the networks, right, so you can connect to just anybody. So they're going to give it fairly reduced capabilities, and obviously, the plugin, it was plagued with a lot of problems, and only recently, I believe Oracle is pulling the plug on the plugin. Right, it says, I forget it. We're not going to no longer support the plugins. Anyway, JavaScript for a while was headed in the same direction. Oftentimes, people are saying, no, I don't want to have any cookies. I'm going to turn off support for JavaScript. Right? Websites could do. All of a sudden, they couldn't do. Right? They couldn't track you somehow. They couldn't keep track of all the goodwill that was put into keeping track of you, because we were trying to provide you with a better experience. Was painted by a lot of the negative aspects of that, right? So what do you mean you're tracking my every move, right? Some nefarious goals there, right? But anyway, but lately JavaScript has become somewhat required, right? It says, if you don't support JavaScript on your browser, I don't even want to talk to you, right? It's kind of like the other way. It has kind of like turned the other way around, right? When it was like more on the user's hands of saying, well, no, I don't want to use websites that don't use JavaScript. It's kind of gone the other way around. It says, well, no, if you don't support JavaScript, I don't want to even interact with you, right? And but today has become much more mainstream, right? That we're allowing this remote code run on our browsers. And so what do we want for the JavaScript to be able to do? We want to be able to be closer to the user moves and does various gestures, either moving the mouse or clicking, or as they interact with our user interface. We want to be able to react immediately, right? We want to maybe do some validation of the form. Right, maybe highlight content that is not correct, or something that was required and we didn't provide. Okay, so let's look at some of the examples. Here's the simplest of JavaScript programs. A simple hello world. JavaScript program. So let's open it up, and it just comes up and says hello, right? And this program is very simple, right? What it does is just pops up a dialog saying hello world. And the way JavaScript is made part of the page is by this new element called the script element. Right? And the script element is used to demarcate, right, plain old HTML, right, and programmatic code. Just like we use the style elements to demarcate between HTML and styling code, right? So in the style element, we can embed CSS. And CSS is fundamentally a different language, right? So now we're going to be able to add here programmatic coding here, right? So we're going to, with this new element script, we're going to be able to put in there variables, for loops, if statements, while loops, anything you would expect that you can do with programmatic language, you you can do with JavaScript within the confines of the browser. Yes, and whatever security measures the browser is taking for that code. So here's the simplest of JavaScript piece of code. It just uses a built-in function called alert, right? Which basically does what you would expect. It opens up an alert box, right, with whatever text you have there, right? And if I reload the page, right, the first thing that it does is it runs that function and it calls it. Okay, make sense? Right? If we look at the source code, let's see. What it does is that it loads HTML. It has it loads the head. You notice inside of that head we have the script. You see that? So that page runs and it loads the hello world. Notice what's happening when I reload this. Notice that below we have a body and we have content, right? We have an H1, we have a paragraph, we have a pre over here. Notice that when I reload this, wait a minute, let me kill it. Let me open it up. Notice what's happening here. The alert came up. See that? The alert came up. The content hasn't loaded yet. Right? The content has been, right, for this alert box for you to say okay. Right? So that has large implications, right? That if the script is doing something, it takes a long time to do whatever it needs to do, right? The content below that continues, that is after that script, will not show, right? Okay, and this is because a browser has a single thread execution, right? It can only do one thing at a time, right? It's busy. While it's busy handling the JavaScript, it can't continue, right, to render everything else, right? So you have to be careful of what piece of code you put in that script. And you can't have long-running scripts in there, right? Because if it's long-running, what's going to happen with the content? The content's not going to load. The user's just going to sit there waiting for the script to do whatever it needs to do, right? And after a second or two or three, finally the content shows up, right? So oftentimes what developers might do, okay, is to have scripts that they might that they're long running or that they have to do some fairly complex work. Oftentimes at the end, way down here in the body, even though it's not kosher HTML, nevertheless it's understood by the browser. Right? Browsers understand that even if it's within at the end of the body, it will load correctly. Okay, so that the content can load, right, very fast, and you see the content, and then the long-running script can take a second or so to do whatever it needs to do. Meanwhile, the user being very, very slow, they might be reading whatever they need to read, while we, right, in parallel, right, can keep doing our work. Right? But for now, we're going to keep it here in the head, right, where it's supposed to go. Right? Typically, this is the kosher syntax where we put the script in the head. Right? Now, this script, right, is doing something very simple. It's using a default function alert. Another thing that I want to point out is that when the script is parsed, it's immediately executed. Okay. So any variables, any functions that you might have that you're calling are immediately executed, right? And functions that you're declaring, they are immediately declared. Okay. This is important, as we'll see a little later, is that when you start loading other scripts, like from maybe jQuery or AngularJS, right? All these scripts, right? When you load to them, they will be downloaded and they will be executed. Right? Any variables that they declare, any global variables, any global functions will be part of the same namespace. Right? So you got to be careful, right? If you declare any variables in the global space, right, that happen to have the same name as other variables or functions in the global space that with other libraries that you're loading, you have a namespace collision, right? It'll be last one wins. You happen to have a variable and you're loading somebody else's library that has exactly the same variable, it will override your variable. Or if you have a function that has the same name as another one, they'll have a collision. So oftentimes we'll have to deal with these issues. How do you deal with namespaces? Right? How do we deal with the fact that I'm loading all these scripts, right? I want to make sure that everybody is within a safe, right, namespace, right? Okay, and that's a fact that we need to deal with, and we'll talk about various techniques to deal with that. Right now, it's just alert. Let's look at another one. Variables. So very much like, oops. Why is that not loading? Huh. Experiments. Portal. It's not there? Huh. Really? Here. Open recent. CS4550. Anyway, I believe, wait, cancel, let me stop the server. Oh my goodness. Another file drawer. I believe this was introducing the fact that obviously you can create a whole bunch of variables. Let's see, experiment. What is it? Experiments. JavaScript, and then O3 exports A plus B. O3, variables A plus B. Huh, okay. Variables. Okay, let's look at this one. So here's a very simple script. Basically, it's declaring a couple of variables, A, B, C, just adding it, right? Just, what would you expect with a full-blown programming language, right? You can create variables with all sorts of arithmetic, expression. So if you think you can do it in any other language, you can certainly do it here in JavaScript. You have a math library that has all sorts of mathematical functions, power, sine, cosine, logarithmics, right? Squares, everything you would expect in a decent programming language. Okay. Let's see. Then we have variables. We have loops, as you would expect. You have loops. This one is calculating factorial, and it's just a simple loop from 1 to 5, and just a running multiplication of all the values between 1 and 5, and then alerting for the factorial, right? All these are very simple, just to get you acquainted with the fact that this is a, just another programming language. This is, let's see, what is this? This is arrays, right? Here we're declaring a variable called values, which declares a whole bunch of values inside of an array. Okay. Notice that none of these variables were declaring them with any particular data type. Integers or strings or floats or doubles. JavaScript is what's considered to be a there are no types in JavaScript, right? You don't declare variables to be a particular type. The type of a particular variable is determined at runtime. Okay, if it's interpreted, right, when you operate on it. Okay, if you're trying to add things, I'll see if those are numbers, right? If they can be parsed into integers or numbers, then I will do arithmetic addition. If one of them I know cannot be parsed into a number, right? It's a string. Then it will interpret as a string concatenation. Yes. So the type of the data type of the variable is determined at runtime. Here, these are all numbers, and we're using a for loop and an if statements, right, to iterate over this and find the minimum and the maximum in the array, right? And it uses the very familiar square bracket syntax, right, to refer to the values in the array, and then it alerts the minimum and the maximum, right? All simple stuff. Okay, so beyond the oops, let me. Beyond the common things that you can do with any programming language, right? Because it's a language that is running inside the browser, right? It has peculiar powers, right? Peculiar things that you can't do with other programming languages. Specifically, has a set of libraries that allow it to interact with the browser, right? And be able to manipulate the browser. Okay. One of the things that it can do is to manipulate the DOM, right? See this document that was parsed, right? And notice that this is the interpretation of the document. But look at the source, the original source that was downloaded. If I click here, in the original source, notice that we have H1, right there it is, document object, yes. We have H2, dynamic HTML. There it is. There's dynamic HTML. Nowhere do we have hello world. Where does this hello world dynamically from this script over here? See that? Right. This script is using a global variable called document. Right. That document, this document object represents this object, this entire object over here, and more. Right. It represents the data represented by this object over here with the head and the body, right, and all the pieces that are in here, and we can programmatically manipulate this object. Look at that. You see that hello world string over here? See this hello world string over here? It was not in the original source. Nowhere. It's only inside of this document.write. You see that? Okay, so we dynamically added that string to the document, right? It wasn't there, original document, it's not there. It's only we programmatically added it. So notice that the browser, when it renders, there is a hello string in there, but it was programmatically added as opposed to statically in there originally. Yes? So we can extend that idea using another script. Look at this script over here. See this script over here? Notice this UL here, this unordered list here, hello 0 all the way to hello 9. I don't see any ULs or LI in the HTML. Instead, we are dynamically adding the element UL. See that? We are dynamically adding the LIs and the text. Yes? So we can dynamically create all this HTML. Right? If you go to the elements, which is the document object, notice that it has a well-formed UL element with a whole bunch of LIs in there. You see that? They weren't there in the original source code. Programmatically using document.write. Make sense? Right? So anyway, so the point of this is that we can dynamically manipulate the DOM. Right? Not that we would do it this way. Right? This is the most low level, right? The most primitive way of dynamically creating content, right? And I would never suggest that you do it this way, right? But I only want to prove to you that we do have control over that object, okay? Plus we have here, what else? We have in the source code, we can do math, right? For instance, 7 plus 4. We can add to the content, you know, any additional content that is calculated, right? We could do all sorts of things. Maybe we can go off to, you know, Netflix, or we can go off to, you know, Amazon or IMDb and do some query, calculate something very complicated, and then add it dynamically to this content, right? We can do all sorts of really cool things. And I think I'm out of time. Anyway, here at the last example here, I'm adding a multiplications table, right? Notice I use a combination of the table element outside, and then internally, I'm creating a string with table rows, and inside I'm creating table data to the documents. See that? And then we have the multiplication table dynamically generated. See that? Anyway, go through these examples so that we can breeze through it come Tuesday, right? And we can start doing some really cool, interesting things. I do have office hours right after this, so if you want to chat, I'll be in my office. All right? All right, thank you.